Speaking to reporters in the Rose Garden yesterday, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy criticized Congresswoman Cheney and Congressman Kinzinger for joining the committee investigating the Capitol insurrection. Here's what McCarthy said, followed by Cheney and Kinzinger's reactions.
You know, some Republicans have been saying that the GOP should play ball on this committee. You could get the three.
Who was that? Adam and Liz?
Well,
aren't they kind of like Pelosi Republicans?
Pelosi Republican?
Well, look, we're about this very serious business here. We have important work to do, and I think that's pretty childish.
Look, it's childish. We're doing big things right now. We're getting to the answers of the worst attack on the Capitol since the War of 1812. You can call me whatever names you want. And I just believe that, look, you know, bottom line, I'm an elected member of Congress. I'm a Republican. Kevin McCarthy is technically my Republican leader. And to call, you know, members of Congress by childish names like Donald Trump used to do, I guess is just kind of par for the course. What do you say to Republicans?
Well, it's what stupid people do. It actually is. And if you look at the facts, which, of course, Kevin McCarthy doesn't ever do, Liz Cheney has like a 95% ACU rating. 95% conservative rating over the course of her career, which is actually my conservative rating. But what I found out a long time ago, and Liz certainly has known for some time now, obviously by seeing what's going on, this Republican Party, Donald Trump's Republican Party, doesn't care about ideas, doesn't care about ideology, doesn't care about conservatism. It is disconnected from conservatism. It's all tribal. It's all about voodoo and medicine. It's all about violence on January the 6th. It's all about covering up actually what Donald Trump is doing. And so Kevin McCarthy resorts to childish name calling for, again, I don't know what Adam's lifetime conservative rating is, but Liz's is 95%. 95%. One of the one of the more conservative members in the United States Congress, by the way. And so that's what they resort to. Why? Because that's all they have. They don't have the facts on their side. They don't have history on their side. So all they can do is act like a 3-year-old and our Donald Trump, same thing, and just throw names around. So lots of luck with that. It's not going to change the fact that 4 police officers are going to talk about how they were brutalized and almost killed by Donald Trump supporters on January the 6th as they were trying to actually overthrow the federal government and commit sedition against the United States of America and stop the voting, which is constitutionally mandated, of the Electoral College voting. But, you know, that's the party that Kevin McCarthy will always be associated with. Lots of luck with that, buddy. Lots of luck with that.
Let's bring in former aide at the George W. Bush White House and State Department's Elise Jordan, who is up way too early for us this morning, and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and associate editor of the Washington Post and MSNBC political analyst Eugene Robinson. Good to have you both. Elise, Joe was using a kind word, I think, stupidity. But to me, these Republicans, like Kevin McCarthy, are making a choice that I think goes beyond stupidity. They know the facts, and they were even there. And so where do we go from here? How does one deliver the truth to the American people when they have such a loud force propelled by Donald Trump and existing on Capitol Hill in Republican leaders who refuse to actually face the truth?
I do think that this commission and the hearings and the truth that is going to be heard from the testimony, especially today, of police officers who witnessed the hand-to-hand combat that happened. And it happened on January 6th when there was an insurrection at the Capitol at the behest of Donald Trump. I think it's going to be powerful, and I think it's important. And I think that Republicans might have overshot a bit in refusing to cooperate because they are going to allow Democrats to dominate the message and the headlines, whether they like it or not. There's only so much avoidance that Fox News and other outlets can do of covering what's actually happening because the images are so searing and because the testimony is so upsetting. And you just listen to Kevin McCarthy, and just back to what Joe was saying about how absolutely childish the comments are. You know, Donald Trump was able to transfix millions of people with his rare blend of bullying charisma, but other Republicans just don't have it, and it just comes off as such a cheap imitation and pathetic that they aren't more serious. When Donald Trump, at least everyone knew that he was a loon and kind of expected, you know, that of him, but then you have, you know, other leadership doing this, and it just is so distasteful. And you would think that the attack on their place of work and the citadel of American democracy would actually move Republicans into action, but I guess not.
Yeah, you would think that. You would think also that a minority leader, Donald Trump turned Kevin McCarthy, or kept Kevin McCarthy a minority leader again for a couple more years. But Gene Robinson, you would actually think that a minority leader, God, I keep forgetting all Republicans in Washington, D.C. are in the minority because of Donald Trump. I keep forgetting that. So let me get that straight. You would think that a minority leader who called a loser president who had just lost an election and was yelling at him to bring them some help, to call his people off. And other people heard him saying that. He went around bragging to other people about how he had shouted to Donald Trump that they were his people. You would think he would be interested in getting the truth out. But, of course, he's not. Yeah. And these Republicans, these patriots who actually want to get the truth out and hear from our law enforcement officers who were brutalized that day, beaten with American flags to an inch of their lives, Kevin McCarthy and the Republican Party want these Republicans to be part of their conspiracy of silence. So they can keep lying about January the 6th and say it was just tourists that were just sort of wandering through the Capitol on that day.
Yeah, you know, Joe, on a human level, it's kind of pathetic, isn't it? I mean, Kevin McCarthy, you know, who, as you said, was there and understood at the time exactly what was happening, understood exactly who was responsible, Donald Trump, yelled at him to do something, to call it off, to get some help to the Capitol. And then, you know, very shortly thereafter, it sort of slunk down to Mar-a-Lago to bend the knee to this absurd bully who dominates this big chunk of our politics, and it's just pathetic. But the question, my question going into this hearing is, how hard does the Trump cult information bubble try to keep all of this out, to keep out what is going to be aired at this hearing, to keep out the footage of the violent encounters, police officers being beaten and clubbed and squeezed and in danger of losing their lives. This angry mob overrunning the Capitol. To what extent are they going to really try to keep this out of their sort of fictional information bubble, in which it was just tourists, you know, who dropped by and who, as I think the former president said, were welcomed by Capitol Police. It was a loving scene, he says. It's just ridiculous and offensive and sick. But a lot of people will believe that because cults believe their leaders. And so are they going to try to keep all this off of Fox News and Newsmax and the other outlets, or is it going to penetrate in some way?